Hey guys, this is Justin. Hello and welcome to another video. So you guys have really enjoyed the content I've put out recently about the Clone Wars, specifically evaluating different vehicle types, and because I absolutely thrive off praise, we are going to continue that series today with a look at one of the more interesting designs of the Clone Wars era, and that is the Hailfire droid. This is one of the honestly really visually interesting droids utilized by the CIS during the Clone Wars. I gotta say, out of universe, they did such a good job pumping out so many unique and interesting designs, but does the vehicle make any sense? Does the droid make any sense? Let's go over the lore and we'll talk about it. So you might expect that this would be a Bactoid product. I mean, they made a ton of the Trade Federation and CIS's ground forces, including some which are similarly weird, like the Dwarf Spider droid, as well as more traditional armor like the MTT or the AAT. But no, the droid was actually created by the Zychar, you might remember them if you've read Plagueis, owned Howard Shell Engineering Corporation. Their most notable other creations being the Vulture Droid Starfighter and the standard Trade Federation Lander. And yeah, these vehicles were available to the Trade Federation, so clearly the tie between that faction and the corporation go back even before the Clone Wars most likely. What we see of the Hailfire and Attack of the Clones is pretty simple. These are obviously fairly lightly armed vehicles which are traveling very quickly across the battlefield and which obviously possess incredible firepower. Like, that's the thing that I noticed the most. There's an entire salvo fired with individual tracking missiles, a single of which is seemingly powerful enough to destroy an ATTE, at least if it hits it just the right way. There is more though if we look at the secondary material, especially the new essential guide to vehicles and vessels. It explains that the Hailfire droid was specifically being provided by the Intergalactic Banking Clan, not the Trade Federation, despite their previous associations with the Engineering Corps. No, the IGBC, who actually used it before the war as a way to shake down clients who were late on their loans. It's kind of funny because this specific point is actually reiterated in the Attack of the Clones cross-section, or I guess it came from there first, but it was also and technically formally used simply to protect IGBC holdings. And this is kind of funny because, again, we're seeing a parallel to what the Trade Federation did with their Lucre Hulks. Oh yeah, these things are simply meant to protect ourselves. No, not quite. Anyway, the Hailfire was actually a really simple design. It was two large drive wheels, what the guide calls an armored command module, a pair of Hailfire missile launchers, hence the name, the Hailfire class droid tank, and a retractable laser cannon, which I think is really nice. I mean, we see the way that this thing is tearing through the battlefield. You want to at least be able to defend yourself if things get sticky. Just to reiterate though, this is a tank. It does not have a droid operator. It is a droid. You can directly contrast that to something like the AAT, which actually had a droid operator and a gunnery squad. Interestingly, the guide actually talks about the Hailfire as being a somewhat dumb droid. It says that it generally relies on pre-planned routes and simply uses sensors to attempt to detect and avoid any obstacles. This thing isn't really thinking on its own, and there's a benefit and a curse to that. You want your potentially suicidal, high danger asset to be willing to drive into certain doom if it means they can cripple, say, the enemy's line of armor. Still, the way it's described I think is kind of interesting, and I'm going to just read a passage straight up. Scanners located in the drive unit determine whether routes are free of obstacles. During combat, the drive units often pause while reassessing the surroundings, bringing the vehicle to a sudden halt. When the Hailfire drive's motors reactivate, the vehicle accelerates to its top speed within seconds. This makes the Hailfire appear erratic, although the droid is always fully aware of its final destination. It continues, saying the vehicle doesn't need an advanced logic circuit. It merely rolls into battle and blasts anything identified as an enemy unit. Unfortunately, this actually has a bit of a drawback. The simplicity is nice, however, the Hailfire is unable to read and assess novel situations. For example, if an extremely high value enemy target is on the battlefield, unless that target's been programmed into the Hailfire as a priority, it could simply ignore it. Now, it was possible to overwrite the droid's control remotely, but again, that sort of ruins, I think, some of the benefits there. Hailfires typically use saturation attacks. They had 30 missiles in total, and typically if a unit was difficult to hit, it would fire a salvo, otherwise single missiles could do the job. These were self-guiding, and as we saw in Attack of the Clones, extremely be dangerous. Unfortunately, once those 30 missiles have been spent, the Hailfire becomes relatively useless. That one blaster is really just for protecting itself. I mean, you could also crush enemies with the thing's massive wheels, but that's sort of a basic understanding of the Hailfire as it exists. So is it a good design? Well, I mean, the primary element is those massive wheels. Could the Hailfire exist in a better form with, say, normal tank treads or even a repulsor lift? Well, it seems like the wheels are meant to facilitate the Hailfire's extremely fast acceleration and movement. Personally, I don't see any reason why a repulsor lift couldn't do the job, and the downside of the wheels is a lack of true lateral movement. Now, it's very possible that the wheels increase the unit's reliability or significantly decrease the cost or difficulty of manufacturing, in which case, yeah, that makes sense. The Hailfire is basically just a platform for delivering missiles. It doesn't need to think, it doesn't even need to come back alive most times if it fires off its full salvos, and that's it. I do think it works pretty well within the CIS's arsenal. Like, it's not a true artillery piece. The CIS has, for example, the J1, which sort of fits in that role. It's more of a quick strike, high damage vehicle. The Republic will probably pretty heavily target these things just because of the risk of not doing so, but that's also where the extreme speed and the very simplistic droid brain helps quite a bit. I do sort of wonder about use case scenarios for a vehicle like this. It seems like Geonosis, with its flat planes, at least in place, are like the Hailfire's ideal setting. The Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels talks about it operating in an urban environment or on streets, but this thing will not be able to move laterally or even turn around quickly when compared to a normal tank. One way I like to imagine them being used is essentially in a position where the Republic and the CIS are in a stalemate, both sides have armor, maybe are hiding, other vehicles can feed information back to the data operator of the Hailfire or even give specific orders, and its missiles can attempt to strike those targets even if they're beyond line of sight. It's somewhat interesting to compare the Hailfire to the N99 Persuader. Both vehicles tend to move in very straight lines, but whereas, and I mentioned this in a prior video, the Persuader is happy to just run over or through things, the Hailfire relies on those basic droid commands plus its speed. So overall, I'd say a good vessel. Again, I understand why they didn't use treads or small wheels. Maybe they wouldn't be fast enough to allow the Hailfire to reach the speed it desires, and I mentioned that too about the repulsor lift, but I like the idea. I think the weapons are smart. The sort of short-range artillery piece has a lot of impact on the battlefield, I imagine. So yeah, goofy, but also deadly. That's just my thoughts though. Let me know what you think, of course, down below.